you might want to take a step back and actually ask yourself, when's the last time I checked in with me? When's the last time I checked in with Krysta and thought about where I want to be 2 months from now? Where do I want to be 6 months from now? Where do I want to be 10, a year, 5 years, whatever timeline you want to visualize. Then you have the other side. You have the side of the choice of the person who says to themselves, okay, instead of seeing this decision as a cost, I'm going to choose the route of making the investment in future Krysta, the investment in future me. That's the person who does choose maybe the lean protein and a vegetable and some healthy fats instead of the bottle of wine, the tub of ice cream.
Let's link up with Krysta on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
What is up, guys? This is Coach Krysta. Welcome to episode 45 of the FYX. Every week that I get closer and closer to episode 52 to hit that official 1-year mark, I feel really excited and proud of myself. As always, I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and I am back with another solo episode. I am going to actually completely change the topic on the fly that I plan to talk about today. And as a little programming note, I wanted to mention, if you're listening to this, my sound quality may not be completely up to snuff as it usually is. And the reason for that is I'm recording this podcast and realized that I was missing a piece to my microphone. And the entire experience, of course, inspired me to come on, record this episode using just my headphones. I also am grappling with some spotty internet, and I'm actually recording this not only in Zoom, but also on my cell phone and also in GarageBand in the event that as I pressed play, I may lose internet at any time. Sharing this to give you guys the real, raw, honest background of what it takes to just frankly get shit done when you want to get shit done. And more importantly, and the topic for today's conversation is talking about being adaptable and talking about being flexible. And I really wanted to talk about this today because it's actually not something that I've ever been really good at. If I'm being really transparent, I'm definitely the person who's struggled with having a fixed mindset. I'm a total perfectionist to the point where sometimes, well, I've learned in the last year to move away from this attitude, I won't feel ready or I won't want to do things because I feel like everything needs to be complete. All the T's need to be crossed, all the I's need to be dotted, just so I can actually put myself in a position to be ready to try something new and to feel like that I'm giving my 100% best effort in whatever that thing is. And when I sat down this morning with some inspiration for this podcast episode, I was actually listening to another podcast, a Lewis Howes podcast, and his podcast, The School of Greatness, very, very well known. He's somebody that I admire and aspire to be like in terms of my own podcasting journey. And the person he interviewed for his latest episode, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, is a psychologist. And he came on this particular episode to talk all about burnout and more specifically understanding your identity in the context of who you are today, your future self, specifically who you will be tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that. And they started talking a little bit about fixed mindset. And while the podcast didn't necessarily use examples of fitness and nutrition, they did make a few mentions when it came to health. And so when I set out to record this, I had a pretty big plan that I was excited to kind of unveil and talk about and use that as my inspiration for this conversation. And as the world would have it, as ironically as this all kind of came together, I had to adapt and I had to be okay with things not going the way that I planned. And in true nutrition coach mentality fashion, I thought, well, boom, here's a perfect opportunity to make comparisons for everybody listening to this about how these types of situations 100% apply to your fitness, nutrition, and health goals. So that's exactly what I hope to accomplish in today's episode. And we're going to see how it goes. At the end of the day, when it comes to podcasting and it comes to using this medium and using this platform, There's not a big barrier to entry because all you need is a microphone in your computer. In my case today, all I need is some headphones and my computer. And it would have been super easy for me to just be like, you know what, I've been on this streak, but if I only miss 1 week, it doesn't really matter. It's fine. Like my listeners, it's not a big deal. But I thought, you know what, I have something to say and I can ground it in my own experience, which is what I ultimately try to do in everything that I share on social media. And I hope that somebody listening to this, maybe you take comfort in the fact that most of us who maybe when we seem like we have our shit together, we don't. And more importantly, in the fact that we all got to figure out how to go with the flow, let our plans change sometimes, and we'll learn things from that, right? We'll learn things from that. And that's super, super, super key and something that I feel like I lose sight of all the time because I just want to give my best self always. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad personality trait to have, but it can certainly get the best of you when you're somebody who's looking to make progress. So let's dive right into the most obvious nutrition component of that. I used this analogy on the episode last week. It's going to come up again and again, but this is one of those scenarios where it's like, why pop all 4 tires just because you had one that got a flat on the side of the road? I could have sat down, figured out that I was missing a few pieces that I needed to set my microphone up and been like, F it. No podcast, no message from me this week, and justified it in my mind again and again and again. But in taking into context the conversation I was just listening to with Lewis Howes and Dr. Ben Hardy and what I plan to discuss on the episode today anyway, one of his messages really stuck with me. And I just thought I would be remiss if I didn't share this because I'm sure there's somebody out there listening who can get a good laugh out of it because they relate, or hopefully take it into a situation of their own the next time when things don't exactly go as planned. And what that is, that main takeaway, there were like 5 or 6, and I took a bunch of notes and I have them right in front of me as I'm preparing for this conversation and thinking about what I wanted to talk about. But the first one is thinking about your future self and specifically recognizing the fact that change is inevitable, but growth is optional. Now, that's a quote from someone else. I don't know who originally said it. Dr. Hardy did say it in this podcast episode, but I'm sure someone else said it at some other point in time. But I just love that because it's so stinking true. We all know change is inevitable. Other ways that people say this often is the only thing that's guaranteed in life is that things are going to change, but it's how you respond to them. That's where the growth comes from. To take it a step further and to talk more about his conversation, which I will definitely drop in the show notes because I think it's a podcast episode that we all could benefit from listening to you. And it really got me pumped up and psyched to do this today. So the first part is this: thinking about your future self and having a relationship with your future self. We're going to get a little bit hypothetical and philosophical and dive into some psychology throughout today's conversation. And actually, I shouldn't even say the word hypothetical because this is my real life scenario right now that I'm using to describe all of this. But one of Dr. Hardy's messages in this podcast episode with Lewis is the fact that we need to remember and tend to forget that we are not our former selves. We never will be our former selves down to the minute by minute of changes that happen to us throughout a day, but also the changes that happen in our lives from week to week, from month to month, from year to year. And what I thought was really unique about his description of that, and really something that just kind of like left an impression on me, was the fact that one thing that we tend to forget is that we always know more information than we knew before. So let's take that into the context of my example of my current situation, and then I'll tie it into nutrition too, because that's probably what you came on to listen to when you clicked this episode. So I'm sitting here. I realize that I don't have my podcast microphone. I also find out that the internet could go down at any second. I did have a brief moment of, oh shit, what am I going to do? And after that, I was like, well, what am I going to do next? I'm going to ask somebody who could probably help me. So of course, the first thing I do is hit up my editor, Tony, and say, hey, I need a backup plan. I set up my phone, use that for my video. I still set up my Zoom anyway, fingers crossed, hoping that the internet will stay intact. And then I also throw on GarageBand in the background to make sure that I have another backup for recording this conversation. As I'm in the process of doing that, that's when I realized that I don't have my podcast microphone. piece to connect the cord, I should say, to connect it to my computer so that I can actually use it and produce a better sound quality for this episode. When I realized that, I should also mention that I am like 25 minutes away from home and have a tight schedule, and I'm dropping this episode. You're listening to it. I recorded it probably 24 hours before. That's just the way my life has been recently. And what I kind of took as like my saving grace in this moment, or my way to just take a deep breath and say, okay, it's going to be fine, and I'm going to figure it out, is the fact that I am now future Krysta. Thinking about future Krysta compared to the Krysta who was brand new to podcasting 6 months ago, 8 months ago, even a year ago, when I first started talking about the fact that I wanted to start a podcast. If this had happened to me 2 episodes in, or 3 episodes in, or maybe not even 10 episodes in, I have to be honest, I probably would have figured out an excuse in my mind to just not have an episode this week and convince myself that it was okay and just deal with it and be like, sorry guys, change to the program, not coming out this Thursday. I'll be back next week. But thinking about the old version of myself from 8 months ago, 10 months ago, a year ago, to the person who right now is on episode 45 of her show, I'm cool with figuring it out and being adaptable and making it work, because I know that I have a message to share. And maybe if you miss a few words, or maybe if the production quality isn't a 10 out of 10, like I would love for it to be, because I want my brand to represent quality and consistency. It's one of those times where consistency has to take the win over quality. And I'm going to say that again, because I feel like this is what I've been trying to get out for the last few minutes, and I finally got to it. Consistency sometimes takes the cake over quality. Here's the perfect nutrition example. It relates super well to why we look at macronutrients as a possible approach to dieting and changing our body composition. If you think about the fact that people tout macros as something that's very flexible, it totally is, because you see people a lot of times on social media, they kind of blow it up, but they're the people who are eating donuts and burgers and all these things that I can list that are seemingly quote unquote unhealthy. And while yes, they aren't the most nutritious foods, which is probably a better word choice, we still like them. We still want to indulge in them from time to time. And when it comes to tracking your macros, something that people really talk about often is the fact that it makes that approach to looking at your food and looking at your calories that way and diving deeper into understanding protein, carbs, and fat. It gives you the flexibility to be able to, quote, fit those things in with the rest of your diet. Now, that's where this whole conversation around quality and consistency can come in, because I can make the argument that I could hit my macros every day and maybe my food quality isn't that great. For example, technically speaking, number for number, macro for macro, calorie for calorie, I could eat a bunch of pizza every single day, a couple of slices, and arguably make them fit my macros in the sense that I can come close or fall underneath my protein, carbs, and fat goals. Is that really the best quality in terms of food choice that I can make? In terms of looking at my macronutrients, looking at my micronutrients in particular, and saying to myself, I could have had some vegetables instead. And we all know that there are a bunch of micronutrients, depending on the vegetable choice, that I could have gotten, that I could have eaten and received better nutrients instead of that pizza. 100%. However, maybe I hadn't had pizza in a while and it was there and I kind of gave into that craving and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And I'm going to have it. That's really where this debate between the quality and consistency comes into play. And I would argue that allowing yourself to be okay with your quality not always being 100% perfect all the time gives you the permission to give yourself the opportunity to eat things that you really love. And I think it's a constant battle. I think it's this constant struggle of like, what's better? Quality, consistency, or quality? And while, of course, in a perfect world, we could say quality, 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 we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in a world where everything is going to go our way all the time. Because like I just said, the only thing that's guaranteed in life, the one thing that's inevitable, no matter what your circumstances are, is change. How you respond, how you react, hopefully you respond and not react, is where the growth comes in. And growth is a choice. depending on how you choose to see and move away, move forward, or move past that situation. The consistency is important because when we're thinking about the challenges and the struggles that get in the way, in particular with our fitness and nutrition, it's usually that. I mean, think about it, right? Go back to any time that you've tried to start a diet. Go back to any time that you've woken up on a Monday and you've been like, today's the day, I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit to that workout program. I'm going to commit to tracking my food. I'm going to commit to this, this, and this. All these goals and habits and desires that we know will make us healthier people. Maybe you keep that up for like a week. Maybe you keep it up for 2 weeks. Maybe good for you, you keep it up for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. You're consistent for some amount of time. And maybe you're so awesome that in that time, your quality is badass. Like your quality is, you're eating all your meals cooked at home. You're making all these new recipes. You're going to the grocery store and making sure everything's organic. You're buying the best of the best ingredients because you are just all in and you're excited about it. But then all of a sudden something happens. You get to a point where, I don't know, you may be at that 2 month mark, like I said, that 6 month mark, or even that 2 week mark, and you get a little temptation coming in. Your girlfriends ask you to go out to dinner, you want to have a glass of wine, and you're like, well, this doesn't exactly fit in with that nutrition goal plan that I had, but this sounds like really fun right now because I'm hanging out with my girlfriends. I had a really long week, or I'm struggling with this thing in my relationship. Something's not going well in my personal life, and I could just really use a glass of wine. So you give in, you have that glass of wine, and then what happens? You maybe use that as a downward spiral. The next day, you're going to have a couple more drinks and you want to have dessert. You ditch that amazing meal plan that you set up for yourself a couple months ago. And guess what? The quality certainly isn't there, but then our consistency went out the dang window. And all of a sudden, you're right back to where you started. And unfortunately, you begin to tell yourself this story of, oh, well, I really needed that break. Or, oh, well, I was doing a good job, so I was just rewarding myself. And I feel like I can walk through that example so easily because it's the example that every single one of us, even if we considered ourselves the pillar of health, even, we've probably been in that situation at one point or another. And I can promise, I could go do an interview. I could survey a ton of people right now, people who have kind of hacked it, or the people who have actually figured it out, the people who have achieved the goals that maybe you have. Maybe you're a little jealous of them because you feel like they can eat what they want to eat and they are super healthy and they have the abs and they have the really lean body and they look amazing in the bikini, whatever it is that you wish you had that you don't. And I can guarantee that if I surveyed them, that most of them would tell you they did find the balance that we all seek because they didn't beat themselves up and they also didn't reward themselves every single time they did something great. Instead, they tapped into discipline and they tapped into the idea and truly wholeheartedly believed that just a little bit more consistency, that push that you needed to go that one extra day, to hit that one extra rep, to do it one more time was going to be the difference maker in why this particular diet worked for them versus ones that they had tried in the past. Now, I want to emphasize, if you're not somebody who's gotten to that place, I promise you that you can get there. And chances are you haven't had the right support system around you to make that happen. So if that is you and you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I so identify with that and I so don't want to be that person anymore, you know what to do. Reach out to me. I'd love to help you. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to talk to you more about the mindset. And I hope that this podcast episode is kind of starting that kickstart for you, that thing that's going to help you think about this a different way, that thing that's going to help you, to tie it back to Dr. Hardy's psychology and all of his examples, is going to help you invest in that future self. And that whole future self piece is really interesting to me because the second point he shared that really left an impression was to think about that we have to have a relationship with our future self in order to get where we want to go. And he even made the exclamation that when people ask the question, like, or make the comment that you are kind of the sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, you have to include yourself in that too. And I thought that was great because he's so right. Like, you spend the most time with yourself out of anybody else ever. And if you don't have a good relationship with self, in fact, research has even shown that if you don't identify with your future self at all, like if you were that person, and I feel like I've totally been this person before and going through certain changes in my life where you don't over-attach and you don't or not over-attach, excuse me, you don't attach, like you don't identify, you can't, for whatever reason, see forward and think about what future you wants to accomplish. Research has shown that you are much more likely to be the one that is out there looking for these immediate, quick dopamine hits. Basic things like making really bad short-term decisions, both financially, with your nutrition. Maybe that's what's causing you to kind of give into that, like, oh, I had a really long day, so I just want to have that glass of wine, or oh, like a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream sounds amazing right now. That's more likely to happen when you become less and less connected from that future self. And the reason is because every choice that we make, he said this, and it is something that undoubtedly applies to our nutrition and health. Every choice you make right now falls into one of two buckets. It falls into the bucket of being an investment for future you or being a cost for future you. Now let's tie that back into the nutrition example, which I think is a very easy illustration to make. Think about those choices of going down the path of committing to a plan and figuring out a way to stick to it versus constantly using food as something that is comforting, something that makes you feel better. I hear this a lot with clients that I work with, and they don't always take the time to examine their relationship. And that's something that they get out of working with me that has nothing to do with looking at numbers and looking at their macros. It's looking at how they see food, how they connect to food, how they identify with food, and looking at it from this cost benefit analysis. Essentially, if we want to take it to a little bit more of a business lens, let's say that the heavy cost is involved when you choose that wine, that beer, that drink, that, air quotes again, unhealthy, because I think I want to stay away from that term in the sense that, yes, there's things that are inherently not as good for you, but no food is inherently good or bad. Of course, there's things that don't make us our best selves. They don't make us feel our best selves. They cause us to gain weight, which ultimately, compounded over time, puts you in a situation where you are unhealthy. So it's the collection of all of those things together. But let's say you picked that one. You picked the food, the thing that just puts you in this downward spiral of you choosing lots and lots of unhealthy things and making choices that you know aren't good for you, but you do them anyway. You might want to take a step back and actually ask yourself, when's the last time I checked in with me? When's the last time I checked in with Krysta and thought about where I want to be 2 months from now? Where do I want to be 6 months from now? Where do I want to be 10, a year, 5 years, whatever timeline you want to visualize? Then you have the other side. You have the side of the choice of the person who says to themselves, okay, instead of seeing this decision as a cost, I'm going to choose the route of making the investment in future Krysta, the investment in future me. That's the person who does choose maybe the lean protein and a vegetable and some healthy fats instead of the bottle of wine, the tub of ice cream, or whatever it is. I don't mean to sound like I'm picking on those two examples, but I feel like they're usually the thing that most people find are kind of like their kryptonite or their Achilles heel when it comes to them trying to overhaul their diet and improve their nutrition and just be a healthier person from the inside out. That person is much more likely connected to their future self because in their mind, they're able to see beyond this present moment. They're able to put themselves in a position where they are thinking about future Krysta, future you, and saying, am I going to feel good about this decision in the morning? That's another way to think about it. Maybe think the word future intimidates you. And maybe all you need to ask yourself is, am I going to feel really good about this decision in the morning? Am I going to wake up tomorrow? Because we all know there's something about mornings and fresh starts. Or like, am I going to wake up on Monday? Since I used that analogy before when I was talking about the most opportune time that most people start a diet, and feel good about the choice that I made. If you can't say yes to that question, if you can't wholeheartedly say yes to that question, you're probably in that other bucket. You're probably in the bucket of making a choice that's a cost to you rather than an investment to you. So I'd urge you, again, stepping back, moving away from nutrition and trying to think about what you want to accomplish as a human being, I think do for most people, at least the people that I spend time with, I think a lot of people and a lot of the clients I work with, they do a really great job with this when it comes to their careers. Like, for example, the exercise of, let's say, writing a letter to yourself or something like that within 5 years of some amount of time, and saying like, hey, you are going to accomplish this goal and that goal and whatever other thing it is. And in that time, visualizing and setting yourself up for this promotion or this event in your life. We do that really easily with personal things or professional things. But for some reason, when it comes to nutrition, I think we tend to struggle with that. And I don't really know that I have an answer as to why. I'm sure there's a psychological component to it. And it's something that I'm actually going to kind of think about, because I feel like it's a question that we should ask ourselves. It doesn't align with a lot of other things. Like, I know so many people who are really, really successful in their careers, but a lot of times they do that at the expense of their health. When if they could just realize that if they actually poured more time into themselves, into their own cup, into worrying about what was on their plate, into worrying about getting more sleep, they'd actually do even better in that career because they're a better version of themselves. So I bring that up to really just highlight the fact that sometimes we beat ourselves up too much in focusing on food itself or changing our nutrition specifically, when really we need to take a 50,000-foot view and look at ourselves in terms of how we see ourselves in the world, how we see our future selves, and getting really clear on what that vision is. So in as many ways as I wanted this conversation to be rooted in nutrition specifically, I also think it's important to recognize that sometimes it's about getting away from the nutrition as the topic. It's sometimes about getting away from health specifically. Yes, we can illustrate these examples, but really being able to look at you from all facets of your life. The holistic version of you might just be the missing perspective that is getting in the way of you not seeing the growth, that's getting in the way of you not reaching the goals that you want to achieve, specifically in the context of your health and fitness. So how do we actually do that, right? Because I couldn't let the whole episode go by and just pose these different questions and not give you any actionable steps to help you get there. I touched on the example just now of writing a letter to yourself or something like that. And I think that's a great exercise. I know that a lot of coaches recommend it. Dr. Hardy recommended it in the Lewis Howes episode on the School of Greatness that I've been referring to since the beginning of this. And I think it's something that most people just don't necessarily take the time to do. And I think part of that is because it makes us feel vulnerable. And I think sometimes we get so caught up and overwhelmed in just trying to get through the next day that maybe we don't want to think about 5 years down the line. Or we have a hard time conceptualizing when we feel overwhelmed and busy dealing with our kids, dealing with a job, dealing with your significant other, dealing with the way that our world has changed so drastically over the last year plus, that we're just like, okay, I just have to get through this day, that something that far out feels difficult to imagine. I think other ways that you can do that, like I said, is just kind of like truncate things into smaller moments. So when it comes to your health and wellness goals specifically, and you're looking at your nutrition and you know you really want to make a change, I always focus on two pieces. The first being, can you commit to this for 3 weeks instead of thinking about doing it for 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is? Can you just try to commit to it for 6 weeks? And furthermore, once you get to those 6 weeks, not thinking like, oh, now I get to have this brownie or this thing or whatever it was and just reward myself because I cut out all the foods that I loved. How about once you get there, measuring your progress, noticing that not only do you know more, you probably look a little different, you're sleeping better, your workouts are better, you feel more energized, you're showing up as a better you every single day. And all of those things are not just worth celebrating by putting back in the things you tried to take out, but how about they're worth celebrating to the point where you just continue them instead? Because I think that's the best route to be able to go. Because in the long term, that's how you're going to be able to look back at your old self 5 years from now and be super, super proud of where you are. And with that, one other point that I wanted to make in today's podcast is the fact that we are usually our own worst critics. And interestingly, the same part of our brain that allows us to have empathy for other people of course this makes sense, is the same part of our brain that allows us to have empathy for ourselves. And when I heard that in the School of Greatness episode, I thought to myself, well, duh, like it takes mechanically the same neurons to fire. It's the same part of our brain. So why then do we have such a hard time being nice to ourselves? Why do we have such a hard time when it comes to beating ourselves up? You can applaud your kid, you can applaud your significant other, you can applaud your coworker when they do something great, or you can comfort them and be empathetic to their situation when something isn't going their way, and you can help them work through it. You can help them justify whatever it is. But then all of a sudden, when it's yourself and you need to have empathy and you need to practice empathy towards you internally, we have the hardest time doing it. A lot of that has to do with our mindset, and it has to do with, again, that relationship with our sense of self and how we see ourselves in the world, how we approach things. And sometimes it's because we get so over-attached, we get so fixated on this idea that I set this goal a year ago and now I'm not at it. And you leave it at that and you don't examine it further to say to yourself, well, wait, I'm not at it, but I have all these other variables that changed. And that's not an excuse. I just happen to have all these other variables that changed. And because I know that change is inevitable, but I also have learned from all those other variables. And maybe now I have even better information to make better decisions. So let's wrap that up in the nutrition example. Think about the type of person who's tried a million diets before, and they just want to keep trying different diets. Sometimes, maybe for as frustrating as this is, maybe it's going to take you the journey of trying so many different things and figuring out what didn't work, and maybe holding on to a few of the little nuggets of new habits and new processes that you created for yourself that did, to ultimately customize it into the thing that's going to work for you long term. Because that's how you take all the information that's presented to you, do something with it that's actually going to work for you. So to cap this all off, I feel like I've gone in 17 different directions in going through this entire episode, but I just wanted to jump on and honestly share what's on my mind. And I hope that some of these examples and me kind of sharing the chaos that is my life these days will help someone else see that we can always adapt and figure it out. And we don't want this desire for protection, this desire for perfection. Maybe it is a desire for protection because we're afraid to put ourselves in a situation that isn't showing our best self. So maybe that was a Freudian slip there. But this desire for perfection to get in the way of inching our way towards the best version of ourselves. Hope you guys have an amazing day from wherever you're listening from. And this has been another fun episode of The Fix. We'll see you back next week.